and I want to talk to you about gerrymandering. And that word, how many of you know what gerrymandering is? Oh, wonderful. So you know, the word comes from 1812, Governor Elbridge Gerry. He approved a map that looked like a salamander. He was actually a Democratic Republican, so when people point fingers and say the other party did it, it was Democratic Republicans who did it first. So everybody's got a part in it. And the problem with gerrymandering is the conflict of interest, because the people who are being elected are deciding the districts that are electing them. And so just so you understand what this looks like, if you had a population that had 30%, 60% one party, 40% the other party, as you see on that left one, you could do perfect representation as you see that second grid, and you would end up with the exact representation you should have for that population. The problem with that, though, is none of those are competitive districts. They're all one-party districts locked in, but it is perfect representation. The next one over, if the greens, if the oranges were drawing the map, they could draw the map so it looked good, compact, but completely unfair because they could draw it in a way that they ended up with 5 districts. So they had all the representation. And then if you have the Greens doing it, even though they have less people, if they drew it, they could draw interesting, creative districts and end up with more representation than the oranges. Okay, so that's kind of how gerrymandering works. And to go back to David Thornburg's illustration, in a way, it's like letting the team that won 1 year decide the rules for the next 10 years, because every 10 years, all of our districts are redrawn, and the party that is in control at that point really sets the terms for the next 10 years. But if they're really good, they can draw them in such a way that they have an even better majority the next time around, and then they get to draw the maps for the next 10 years, and they can lock in their advantage for a really long time. So in Pennsylvania, this has happened, and this is our congressional district map drawn in 2011, and it was one of the worst in the country, and some really wonky looking districts. So for instance, Erie County historically was always in one district, was divided into 2 congressional districts. Montgomery County, which by numbers should have 1 district and a little bit of another, was divided into 5 congressional districts. That kind of pinkish one that looks, ooh, I did a bad thing there. What did I do? I've ruined it. Okay, now I fixed it. If all life could be fixed that easily, that'd be great. Anyhow, this one down here, the kind of reddish one, was named Goofy Kicking Donald. It was one of the worst in the country. And when we started, and one of the interesting things about this is that although Pennsylvania has more Democrats registered to vote than Republicans and a pretty even voter turnout, the Republicans who had drawn the map blocked an advantage, 13 Republican congressmen, 5 Democratic congressmen for the last 3 elections since those lines were drawn, which was why there was a lawsuit. And that took into account these different ways to measure gerrymandering. So by the various ways of measuring gerrymandering, Pennsylvania, before the lawsuit, was one of the worst in the country. By 2 of the measures, we were the worst, those first 2. By another, we were the second worst, and by the other 2, we were in the worst 5. So mathematically, I would say numerically, mathematically, statistically, Pennsylvania was the worst. We have friends in North Carolina who will argue that they are the worst, but I think Pennsylvania actually had the dubious honor of being the worst. And so there was a lawsuit, as you might know, and the state Supreme Court decided that the congressional district map was unlawful and kicked out that map, kicked out Goofy Kicking Donald, redrew the map, and we ended up with this map. And this is the map that's in play now. In 2 weeks, we will be electing new congressional representatives, and I changed from saying congressmen because what it had locked in was districts drawn very specifically for incumbents who were all men, and it had been a long time since we've had a woman in Congress. But this time we will have women in Congress because we have new competitive districts and we have a lot of women running. So that's exciting to see new competitive districts, and I've been watching how they play out. They're saying that there are now 4 safe Democratic districts, 4 safe Republican, 5 genuinely competitive 5 leaning one way or the other, and nobody really knows, which is wonderful, because the last 3 congressional races, everybody knew long before the election how many of which party we were going to have, and it wasn't going to change, which is a form of voter suppression, because what you realize is if your vote doesn't count, and it didn't, if those districts are locked in so tightly your vote doesn't count, why bother? And so people just kind of stopped going. What we're seeing this time around is a lot of people very energized, very excited, very engaged in the elections, and very much planning to vote, which is great. But, there's a very large but here. Lawsuits are at best a partial and temporary remedy, and they do not solve the problem of gerrymandering in Pennsylvania. All of our districts will be redrawn in 2021. There's a census in 2020. Congressional and legislative districts will be redrawn in 2021, and even now, our state legislative districts are very badly gerrymandered. So Pennsylvania is among the worst states for gerrymandered legislative districts. By any measure, we're among probably the 4, 5, 6, depends on the year, but we're in the handful of the worst gerrymandered state legislative districts. So what does that mean? What that means is there are communities across the state that are deprived of representation because of the way the district lines are drawn. So our state constitution says, unless absolutely necessary, no county, city, incorporated town, borough, township, or ward shall be divided in forming either a senatorial or representative district. And yet, if you look at maps across the state, you'll see many townships, boroughs, incorporated towns, cities, divided in very bizarre ways, like these. There's Bethlehem, Allentown, Northampton, Emmaus, Nazareth. Go across the state, and I've spoken now, I think in 27 counties across the state. Everywhere I speak, I look at the map, and our website, Fair Districts PA, has a page, fairdistrictspa.com, the problem, district maps, and you can go into our state house maps, our state senate maps, you can zoom in and you can wander around the state on those maps, and I promise you, you will see all kinds of really bizarre stuff going on, and it makes you think, who benefits and who loses? Who is gaining from this and who is being shut out completely from the process? So here's your area. I don't know if you've ever looked at your house district maps, but there's some really strange stuff going on there. Look at this one down on the right, 177. That was drawn very specifically to be a Republican district in an otherwise very Democratic area. And there's some other weird. I mean, any of those weird shapes you see there, there's a reason. And so there's an interesting website you can look at. We turn to tinyurl.com, Turzai data. This is data that was released in one of the redistricting lawsuits from Speaker Mike Turzai. We know this data was used in the last legislative redistricting. And what you see is it has the information of voter registration, but also included in there are election results going back 2016 election results, 2014, 2012 election results. And so what you see is 177, the reason that's drawn that way, is to capture enough Republicans in an otherwise blue area to make a Republican district. But if you look at this whole region, you'll see other stuff going on, like that weird loop coming down from 152 to turn that into a Republican district. And you look at the data in there, and you can see there's a lot of gamesmanship going on, there's a lot of manipulation going on, and this whole region would actually be fairly purple with some pockets of blue and some pockets of red, but a lot of Pennsylvania, if drawn fairly, we would have a ton more competitive elections, but we would also have a far more responsive legislature. So there's lasting implications of this, and those are that if our legislators are given their districts and don't have to run for office, who are they listening to? And you're really fortunate to have a legislator who is listening to you and wanting to represent you. But there are lots of legislators who listen to the leadership because they're the ones who are drawing the maps, and they're the ones that they answer to, not the voters. And even those who want to answer to the voters, the way the whole system works, it kind of locks out the ability to make change in Harrisburg if people are not able to vote in a way that reflects their communities. So we've been working to create an independent citizens redistricting commission. This requires a constitutional amendment. It's a very heavy lift in Pennsylvania. It means getting a bill passed through both houses for 2 sessions in a row, and then it goes to a public referendum. We had a bill, 2 bills this last session, Senate Bill 22, House Bill 722. Senate Bill 22 had 18 co-sponsors. It actually moved through the Senate. It got amended. It got some unexpected amendment added onto it, got over to the House, and then got buried under amendments. House Bill 722 got stuck in committee. Representative Solomon is in that House State Government Committee where the committee chair refused to give the bill a hearing, and then when it was about to be discharged, he did a gut replace maneuver on very partisan lines, which destroyed the bill and turned it into something completely different. So we've seen that it's really difficult to get reform in Harrisburg, and it's all kind of tied in together. Actually, I want to show you this slide. What we're trying to do is show that everything connects, and foundational change, you can't change one thing without kind of seeing the foundational need to change other things. So what we're stuck in is some gridlock. We're trying to call attention to that. We're trying to get changes in the redistricting process, but also to help people understand, unless you lean in, pay attention, and demand change, it's not going to come from inside Harrisburg. It's going to have to come from outside, and we all need to be part of that. We ask you to vote on this issue. If you have legislators, check their positions. We have some cards over there which point you to our Know Before You Vote page. As you were asked before, vote. Get people to come out and vote and make your voices heard. We also have a petition we invite you to sign. We are trying to be as loud as we can in asking for this incredibly important reform. Whatever issue is important to you, if our legislature is not responsive, if our legislators are not able to enact the change that we like, that we're asking for, nothing will be changed. Until this changes, really, not much else will change.